The law faculty at Stockholm University is the largest law faculty in Sweden. We have around 5,500 students, a staff of over 200 people and around 30 professors. Almost all the legal disciplines are represented at our faculty, so it's a very broad range of research and education. Being one of the largest faculties in Sweden, we have a very important role in outreach, and that includes discussing legal topics with the media, writing in the dailies, and also having a lot of interaction with society in seminars and conferences and lectures and so forth. Being located in the capital of Sweden gives us very good opportunities to interact with practical legal life in that respect. So that's a very important role for the law faculty of Stockholm University. The most important issues right now for the faculty regarding research is to ensure that our research is relevant not only in Sweden but also outside Sweden and also outside the Nordic countries. Another very important issue is to ensure the inflow of PhD students because they are our future.
The Stockholm Center for Commercial Law is a 10-year-old legal research center where several PhD students and also retired professors who are working in the area of commercial law in a broad sense have a meeting point, and they can discuss, they can have their coffee breaks, lunches, and we have always a very lively atmosphere at the center. The center has a clear mission as being a meeting point, a focus point between legal practitioners and academia. So therefore we try always to enhance the collaboration between practice and theory. The Stockholm Center for Commercial Law has an international connection where you have collaborations both in the Nordic countries with other centers of the same or similar kind, but also internationally. Especially we have an ongoing cooperation with Oxford and with Christ Church College, where every second year we have a symposium in Oxford which encompasses both the center and people from Oxford and from England and practitioners from Sweden. Then we have a collaboration with ACLU in Lund, which is a sister center to Stockholm, and also with the Oslo Center of Commercial Law. It's more or less the sister organization to Stockholm. So we try really to work on our international and Nordic collaborations with a close relationship with different actors on the international field.
Okay, do you hear me well enough? So, we have a pretty intense and I think interesting program this morning for the 27th general meeting of the Common Core here in Stockholm. And we have people in this magnificent, I would say, even if I'm partial to it, Aula Magna. And for those of you who don't know, this whole wall on my left side can slide electrically, actually make this whole room double. So you are actually in half of our Aula Magna right now. And it's a pretty, I think, spectacular building. I'm not going to say much of substance right now because we have a lot going on. I just want to take the opportunity to thank you all for engaging in rational discourse and peaceful rational discourse, which I think is the best thing we can do as academics in this pretty dramatic time for this continent. And I want to take the opportunity also to thank a few persons and institutions that made this whole event possible. And I'm speaking on behalf of myself, Filippo Valguarnera, but also Mauro Zamboni and Kelly Chan. And we have been organizing this whole event. And we could not have done it without, first of all, the help of two foundations which have generously funded this activity. And it is a Kassel Foundation and Stiftelsen för juridisk fakultetslitteratur, who have both been contributed financially to the success of this venture. And then we have Stockholm Center for Commercial Law, which have assisted us also pretty generously. And we have those who have practically helped us, and not only helped us, actually, they guided us. Our assistants, Hedda Brinklert, Sara Karlsten, and Sara Larsson, who are very actively engaged in all the practicalities, and all the speakers here have been in contact with them and can attest, I think, to their extraordinary efficiency. And then I want to thank Altalex and Jonas Ekfeldt for broadcasting, helping us broadcast this whole event and doing it with a pretty high level of quality, which I think is very nice and allows us to reach a lot more people despite all the traveling problems of this day and age. And I want also to thank the whole staff here in Aula Magna for assisting us with all the practicalities of getting the technique together and put this whole thing in place. I should also say that those of you who are following from home, or following from a distance, you will find a link, depending a little bit on how you entered. The link might be from Stockholm University or the Common Core of European Private Law, these two websites, and there will be a button to access the chat that you can use to ask questions that will be read during the Q&A sessions. And as a matter of practicality, I should also remind you that if anybody wants to use a bathroom, you have just to go outside and to the right. Now, I want to introduce two speakers which will bring a welcome to you all from both from the Stockholm University and from the Stockholm Center for Commercial Law, Claes Hetterstrand and André Andersson. But before we hear from them, I would like you to join me in a minute of silence for the victims and people now suffering in Ukraine. So just a minute of silence. And I welcome Claes Hetterstrand, who is Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University, and then André Andersson, who is Chair of Stockholm Center for Commercial Law. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honored guests and participants of the 27th General Meeting of the Common Core of European Private Law, warmly welcome to Aula Magna and Stockholm University. My name is Claes Zetterstrand, and as Vice President of Stockholm University, I'm very pleased to be able to welcome you all here for this two-day meeting. Perhaps I can take the opportunity to say a few words about Stockholm University to let you know a bit more about the environment that you will be in now for these couple of days. We are now, as we heard, at the university's main campus area, Frescati, a campus that is actually located within the Royal National City Park of Stockholm, the world's first national city park, founded in 1995, to preserve both the natural and the historical cultural values of this green area in northwestern Stockholm. Our university has had its location here since the beginning of the 1970s, when this major campus area was built and the university moved here from various locations in the downtown area, where the university had resided since its origin in 1878. Over the years, the campus has expanded, and one of the buildings that we are most proud of is this, I agree on that, Aula Magna, built 25 years ago and designed by the famous architect Ralph Erskine, who also designed several other buildings here on campus. What kind of higher educational institute is Stockholm University today? Well, we are one of a handful of comprehensive, research-strong universities in Sweden. We are the largest university in Sweden for research and education within the areas of science, social sciences, humanities, and law. With about 5,500 employees and over 30,000 students per academic year. What we do not have at Stockholm University is engineering and medicine faculties, but we do collaborate closely in a university alliance, the Stockholm Trio, with our sister universities here in Stockholm, KTH, Royal Institute of Technology, which has engineering, and Karolinska Institutet, which has medicine. And together we comprise a full academic environment here in Stockholm, the largest academic environment in Northern Europe even. And the Trio Alliance is a fruitful collaboration that is helped by the fact that we are located just a kilometer or so apart from each other here in the northwestern part of Stockholm city. A person who wishes to understand a bit more about the core values of Stockholm University may turn to our strategies. And they will find there three keywords: knowledge, enlightenment, and truth. Through these fundamental core values, we seek to contribute to the development of a sustainable democratic society through the means that we can offer, providing knowledge, enlightenment, and the pursuit of truth, based on critical thinking and accomplished through research and education of the highest international quality. And I believe that those ideals are even more important in these dark days that we now experience. Knowledge, enlightenment, and truth, they stand in stark contrast to the lies, disinformation, and deceit that has been used in the justification of the current evil war that is plaguing Ukraine in this very moment. And in times of insecurity, such as we are now experiencing, the role of universities is critical as independent institutions that can act as sources of knowledge and provide capacity for analysis and hopefully solutions. One might also add another critical component of the academic world: cooperation and collaboration. During the past 2 years, our possibilities for collaboration has in some ways been hampered, more difficult than usual because of the pandemic and associated limitations to traveling. On the other hand, the explosion of online meetings has made it easier than ever to meet across borders in one way. And now that when the world is opening up again, let us hope that we can keep both ways of cooperation and collaboration. And this general meeting is showing just that. It takes place here on campus, and I understand that there are also many attending the meeting virtually. a perfect example of what will likely be the new standard for conferences and meetings in the academic world from now on. And it is my belief that this meeting format will only be of good to all of us. We will have the opportunity to attend many more conferences and meetings through virtual channels, while we still have the possibility to actually travel and physically meet for selected meetings, maintaining the chance for the also important in-person meetings and social activities that physical meetings provide. The best of two worlds. But now, once again, on behalf of Stockholm University, I would like to welcome you all to Aula Magna, and I hope and believe that you will have stimulating sessions and fruitful discussions during the 27th General Meeting of the Common Core of European Private Law. Thank you, and good luck.
Hello, everybody. I am Andre Andersson, and I've been practicing international banking law for about 35 years. And that's made me a great believer in the interaction between the academic and the practical world of law, and also in the international dimension of this interaction. And that makes me particularly proud to be here today to welcome you to this conference. I'm here in my capacity as chair of the Stockholm Center for Commercial Law, where we for over 20 years have provided a platform for this kind of interaction in both the international and the dimension between practice and academia. When I decided to study law in the late 1970s, there were people dissuading me, saying that that is a completely domestic profession and you will never have any international dimension to your work. They couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, since I first entered the law firm, so 35 years ago, I think I worked in an international context almost every day, or at least every week. And I've also come to realize that, I mean, as a lawyer in international context, a lot of what you do is to advise lawyers from other jurisdictions of Swedish law, and that make you, in a sense, a comparative lawyer. And from my professional perspective, I always thought that comparative law is grossly underestimated, because when you highlight and explain your system, you need to know and compare and contrast with the other systems and be able to highlight where the differences are, rather than spending a lot of time on areas where they're actually quite similar. And that's where I find that the output and the production from this project is so very useful, because you go down to the actual contents of the law, rather than staying at the an area of the legal terms of art. I mean, there are a lot of other dictionaries and compilations of comparative law, but they all sort of tend to stay more on the conceptual base. And you may be told that there are floating charges in Sweden and there are floating charges in England, but they don't tell you that the floating charge in England is something completely different from a floating charge in Sweden. So keep up the good work, and I think you should try to market it more to the legal profession, because I think this is a hidden gold mine for practitioners around the world to put their legal advice in a better context. I also say that, I mean, you know that we here in Sweden live in the far north of Europe, and we are particularly happy to have this international context and people coming to you. And not least, you can see that this is a very vibrant international community. We have legal scholars from around the world, and we have Filippo, we have Mauro, and there's actually a very long tradition of Sweden bringing sort of important academics from Southern Europe up here, and it's always started with René Descartes in the middle of the 17th century. Unfortunately, he did not survive the Swedish climate, but I've noticed that Filippo and Mauro seem to be of a sturdier complexion. And it could also be that we have since introduced both central heating and double glazing here in Sweden. So we hope that you survive for many more years here in the Swedish academic environment. So with these words, I will just say that on behalf of the Stockholm Center for Commercial Law, you're all very welcome here in Stockholm. I hope you enjoy this conference, and we hope you come back to sort of further arrangements here in this context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to you both, and now we have formally opened the 27th General Meeting of the Common Core, and I'm not sure if our next guest is all ready, because he was scheduled to start at yes, we have Professor Ugo Mattei already online, and I say hello to him. And it is a pleasure to introduce one of the general editors of the Common Core, and he's joining us from thanks to our pretty spectacular work done by Altalex with organizing the whole internet system. He's joining us from Italy, and he's actually going to speak about one of the founders, or the founder perhaps even, the original founder of the Common Core methodology, which is Rudolf Schlesinger, and who died 26 years ago. And we were originally planning to have this whole conference in 2021, so it would have been a nice round number, 25 years from his passing. Unfortunately, COVID and other matter stuff stopped us, so we had to postpone this celebration to now, and I will give the word now to Ugo Mattei, and after we can take both questions from the public as well as questions from the chat for those following us online. I give you the floor, Ugo. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Filippo. Thank you to everybody, and it's a great pleasure to be here. And in fact, I'm not in Italy, but I'm in Portugal on my way to California. So I was caught in between airplanes and things like that. But this is what happens sometimes. So I'm talking today about something that is very, very close to my heart, which is Rudi Schlesinger. Rudi passed away, in fact, on November 10th, 1996. So it's a little more than 25 years ago, actually. And he was, to me, a great mentor, and certainly he was the inspirer of the Common Core of European Private Law. But he's been much more than that. So because I have a little time, seizing the opportunity that is given to me by the fact that, as I understand, I'm the only speaker in this session, I will try to put Rudi Schlesinger in a geopolitical context of comparative law, and I will try to show how what we try to do with the Common Core, we are still trying to do, and what direction we are taking, and how this whole idea and endeavor was transformed over the years. The Common Core started, as you know, in 1993, so Rudi was still alive, and he was actually, that was my way to present him with a token of gratitude for all the incredible things that he did for me in my academic career, and we will spend a little time on that later in the talk. But Rudi never seen any one of the volumes of the Common Core. Today we have more than 20 volumes by 3 different publishers. But he, the gestation was quite long, because then, now this whole endeavor takes quite a lot of time, and therefore Rudi passed away before seeing our final products. Rudi was born in Germany in Munich in 1909, and he graduated from law school at the University of Munich in 1933. So he graduated exactly the year in which Hitler seized power. Legal positivism at the time was just becoming to show its grimace face. Legal positivism became really evil during Nazi time through the construction of what is known as the dual state, as you know. That is to say, a structure of private law and that works as a predictable and rational structure for economic transactions, accompanied by a structure of public law that was completely degenerated by the so-called Führerprinzip that was introduced just a year after Hitler seized power. Rudy was, so you had the rationality on the political side accompanied by rationality on the economic side. That was the way of totalitarian systems to actually maintain open certain kind of transactions and exchanges with the so-called free world. All of this requires a lot of critical thought to be approached in a way that is far away from the amount of rhetoric and the amount of propaganda that also the West is giving about itself. We'll go back to that later. Rudy was of Jewish origin, was actually a Jewish guy. He came from a family of bankers. He had practiced banking before and during his law school years in Germany. So he was really doing banking law, the kind of banking law we heard that is inherently transnational. And what Rudy was really doing in the years in the second half of the very early part of the 30s was to try to help Jewish clients of the bank to send their money abroad. There were already very clear signs of degeneration that would occur later, and Rudy was very busy doing that. And in fact, my own chair, the Alfred and Anna Fromm Professorship of International Comparative Law at Hastings Law School, was funded as a token of gratitude of one of the former clients of Rudy Schlesinger, who was allowed by Rudy to send his fortune in the United States, where he established a very successful business of winery and liquors in California. And later on, in order to, he knew how Rudy cared about his new alma mater, Hastings College of the Law, that he joined in 1975, and endowed a chair. Actually, that was the first endowed chair in Hastings College of the Law, which Rudy maintained without a holder for a long period of time. And finally, he took his chance to decide to propose to the faculty my own appointment. At the time, I was just 32 years old, and I had no record of publications in the English language. I had like maybe 2 or 3 articles in English. My whole scholarly production was in Italian. So that could show you the amount of influence and prestige that Rudy had in its own faculty, because I was basically appointed to teach comparative law at a very young age in a very prestigious chair, out of his guarantee that I would not have deluded as a scholar the institution. I don't know whether I lived up to the level, but certainly I was immensely proud and humbled by his choice, especially because he went through a kind of long list of people before deciding to take the risk to appoint a young guy like me at the time. Rudy eventually left Europe in 1938. 1938 was really pretty much the year horribilis of the European totalitarianism, as we know. And Rudy was able to go to the United States for a very interesting story. The reason why Rudy had an American passport is actually a very colorful story, which is very nicely depicted in his memoir, that was published years ago at the University of Trento, and that will be republished thanks to the generosity of Filippo Guarnera and of the University of Stockholm by Intersentia as part of our collateral products of the Common Core in the next few months. We were hoping to be able to present this conference with the actual book ready. We were not able to do that, but at least we are able to announce that it is coming out. It's a lovely piece of memoir that Rudy worked on that until the very last moment of his life. And something that came out of that book was the incredible amount of optimism of Rudy Schlesinger. Rudy regarded himself as a lucky man. And I believe, Rudy was a lucky man, because someone who actually is in our business, which is the study of the law, the context in which we are operating changes quite a bit the conditions and the kind of passion that we can put in our line of business. When Rudy Rudy basically graduated in Germany in 1933. That was the peak of the prestige of German global scholarship. Okay, soon after, the decline would be very quick. But he studied in a university setting in which German law and German legal scholarship was at the highest level of its international prestige. The loss of reputation happened, as I said, later, when lawyers, rather than taking a strong critical stand against Nazism, basically were mostly co-opted in the system. Of course, there are always exceptions, but the legal culture is not made of exceptions, it's made of the mainstream. When he arrived in Germany, soon after he arrived in Germany, he started working as a German professor in a high school in New York City, a girls-only high school. Rudy was a very, very handsome guy, and also he was very young at the time. Of course, he was in his late 20s, and he gives this very lovely description of this sort of upper class preppy school in New York during his first stage in America, where he taught himself English. Soon after, he signed up at the Columbia University Law School. Now, we have to stop for a second about the atmosphere at Columbia University Law School in 1940, early 40s. The Columbia Law School, together with Yale Law School, has been the center of American legal realism and the most advanced scholarly institution from that point of view. Columbia Law was actually an enormously important and cosmopolitan institution. And in Columbia Law, there was that marriage between law and social sciences. In a sense, the transformation of law as science that was typical of the era of formalism in Germany that actually was capable to influence the early part of American legal scholarship. What happened with the realists was that law was not really anymore seen as a pure science of the law, but it was regarded as part of the social sciences. And we were in the middle and at the highest level of American legal realism. And American legal realism at the time was also known as sociological jurisprudence in certain aspects. At the time, it was pretty much a transformation to the conditions of the new world of the work of von Jhering in Germany. So it was interest jurisprudence that was arrived in the United States, was digested and transformed. It was, in a sense, hybridized with local social science and in the great belief of technocracy that was the characteristic of the realist period. and also the characteristic of the Roosevelt years in the United States. As you know, that were the years in which the best and most important academics were co-opted in the public service, working in the so-called independent agencies that were, in a sense, the triumph of technocracy and of an idea of law as a means to an end. Okay, so this is so basically Rudy was in Germany when Germany was at the highest level of its prestige, and was in the United States when US law was at the highest level of its prestige. And it was in both cases in some of the top scholarly institutions of the time. Okay, if we compare the story of Rudy, Rudy at Columbia was tremendously successful. Okay, he was actually the only professor, the only student ever to become the editor-in-chief of Columbia Law Review without being a native speaker. Okay, so he had taught himself English for 2 or 3 years, and he then arrived to Columbia Law and was so successful that he became the editor-in-chief of the Law Journal. Those of you who are familiar with American law know that being co-opted as an editor of a student-edited law review requires not only exceptional intellectual skills, but also exceptional human ability. It is very much a process of being accepted by your peers, being recognized as a leader, being appreciated for your capacity to build a team. And Rudy was just, I can witness that from a very direct point of view, was just a fantastic human being. His warmth was incredible. His wit was unbelievable. He was really funny guy. And his capacity to dedicate himself to the others, to me, has no comparison in my experience. Rudy wrote relatively little in his career, but he served in his teaching was legendary. He prepared every class at a level of meticulosity that is unheard of. And he spent hours and hours and hours with students in any moment with no sense of the fact of being wasting time for something more important. To him, after he joined academia, the purpose and the function of the academic lawyer was to transmit his knowledge to the future generation. He told me that many times, and you could really see that not just as a theoretical statement, but you can see that really as his actual way of life. Okay, when he joined Columbia, I told you in 1948, and here there is a first very interesting story that not everybody know, but that I want to share with you, because everybody who is a comparativist has a sense of how important Rudy was as a figure in the making of our discipline. I will tell you something about that. But the making of our discipline, this is very important. The making of comparative law as a scholarly discipline with a claim of being itself a social science, okay, was originated by 3 important books that were published in 1950, okay, at the peak of the Cold War. I would like you always to keep in mind the, so to say, the context in which legal ideas develop, because we work hard in trying to show that the law is neutral, but the law is very heavily affected by the political relationship of the time. So legal ideas always come out of a context, and we need to work hard in understanding that context, okay? So 1948, when Rudy Schlesinger joined Cornell as a law professor, he was actually a junior law professor coming from a full-fledged American education. So if you compare him with other towering figures of the so-called émigré scholars in Germany, people like Rabels, people like Ehrenzweig, people like Kirchheimer, that were older than him and arrived in the United States when they were already fully established academics in Germany. Rudy went through the full dual educational process. I think is the only legal scholar that actually went through all of that. Okay, many of us studied both in Europe and in the United States, or both in the United States and in Europe, but we all have like one fundamental basic education. For example, my fundamental education is Italian, and then I went through master's degree to graduate study in the United States. I taught in the United States for many years, but I remained as a student an Italian in my kind of Italian shoes. Okay, Filippo Guarnera also is an Italian lawyer. He might have studied and worked a long time in Sweden, but he will remain in some sense or another in his mental frame somewhat affected by the system in which you studied the law the first time. Rudy was the only one who actually had this completely double education. So comparative law was a completely natural exercise to him. Okay, he's like a bilingual guy. He's a bijural scholar in the sense of a bilingual guy. He had fully acquainted with two legal systems, and he was fully acquainted at both the theoretical and the practical level, going through the whole process of scholarization. And you should know, and you know very well, that the process of legal scholarization, especially in Germany, is extremely long and time-consuming. Okay, and the same, and graduate school in the United States also is a pretty serious story. Okay, so he arrived there, and he was completely devoted to his teaching. I believe he was actually working hard to prepare materials for teaching. And he actually had prepared all these sort of first-hand materials that he was handing out to students in order to show them the differences and the cases in Germany and here and there. And some of the cases survived all the way to the 7th edition of the Schlesinger's comparative law that I had the fortune to edit in 2010 with Timo Ruskola and Antonio Gidi. Some of the cases remained there since 1948. Okay, so he had all these papers and these cases on his desk, and his office. The guy who was in the office with him, who was a colleague, a young colleague of commercial law, was actually knew that he had that little box containing all his teaching materials. And one day, the agent of Foundation Press visited Columbia Law, entered the room of his colleague. Rudy was not in the office, and he asked whether his colleague had something to give him. And the colleague of Rudy's just said, "No, I have nothing, but you can take this." And he handed to the guy the teaching materials of Rudy that were not supposed to become they were not supposed to become a book. They were just like what Rudy was preparing for his classes. And soon after, a month after, Rudy receives a box. He goes there to open, and there were the proof prints of comparative law, the book that, together with René David, Système Juridique, and with Zweigert and Kurtz, can be considered the turning point, the moment in which comparative law became of age, in a sense. Okay, went beyond the mere description of different legal systems, all the way to a genuine effort to actually compare and to actually create a theory based on how the law behaves in different settings. Okay. Now, Rudy always remained. The story of Rudy is very peculiar because Rudy was in love with the United States. Okay, he was extreme. He was a very sweet man. He was very grateful of the reception that he received in the United States, but he never lost the critical vision of the United States. He had this attitude, which is basically, when you really love something, and he was really in love with the law, and in particular in love with American law, if you are not critical, you are not improving your beloved one. Okay, so Rudy was exceedingly critical of US law, especially of US criminal law. There is an almost legendary article that was published, I believe, in 1966 in the Buffalo Law Review on criminal procedure. which actually shows very well what I mean. Rudy was actually critical of all those aspects of law that would not allow to the law to work as a shield against brutal power. And he reminds of an episode that happened at the Nuremberg trials in 1945, in which the chief prosecutor, that was Robert Jackson, later to become Justice Jackson of the US Supreme Court, was actually rebuffed by Rudenko, his colleague from the USSR, because in his idea, the prosecutors would not have to go after exculpatory evidence. Okay, the idea was the typical American idea that the job of the prosecutor is to throw people behind bars. And Rudenko was actually saying, well, if we find exculpatory evidence, the role of the prosecutor is actually to go after the truth, not to go after the people to put them behind bars. And this always remained a very strong systemic difference between US law and European law. And Rudy was very, very much aware of that and very critical of those attitudes of the American system. Now, let me give you a sense of why I believe that it's true that Rudy was a very lucky man. Not only because he worked and he had a chance of serving as a lawyer in institutions that were at the peak of their enthusiasm, but also because he was spared of much of the decline that we are seeing these days. Rudy, in a sense, it is true that he experienced the horrors of World War II, but he also participated of a time in which there was some sense of human dignity and of human capacity to go beyond the here and now to create a better future. Something that was a time in which there was a sense of constructing something together, of humankind working rationally, perhaps even technocratically if we want, but working for the purpose of reaching some end that is desirable to everybody. He was spared the age of cynicism. He was spared the current mode of thought in which, especially after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the West fell into the single thought rhetoric, left into the end of history liturgy, and this sort of self-admiring posture that has determined a dramatic decline of prestige, especially of American law. And this is really something that I think locates this analysis. I locate myself in trying to understand also the future of what we're talking about. So let me give you a sense of what I'm trying to say to tell you. I met Rudy Schlesinger in a very peculiar time of my life. It was also for me an age of optimism. I met him in 1987. So there was no end of history in sight. The West and the other side of the Iron Curtain were still competing, in a sense, for attracting the minds of the people, and in order to basically prevail on each other within the narrative of the Cold War. But there was not yet the end of history. There was a sense that many of the methodologies that were studied in the United States, especially law and economics, were actually genuine attempts of understanding and truth. And I really enjoyed what said the Vice Chancellor at the beginning. This tendency and this attempt to claim and to see legal scholarship as a search of the truth, something that works within a rejection of every kind of ideological precondition, trying really hard to the best of its possibilities, of course, to the best of its honesty, to understand what is really going on in a long period of time within a long-term vision. Okay, all of that became impossible after the fall of the Berlin Wall. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, neoliberalism has transformed dramatically the legal paradigm into some sort of an agency of neoliberal reactionary politics working in favor of power that are private and capable to determine what people think about the world. Okay, so Rudy has not seen that. Rudy has not seen that. He has neither seen the fall of the critical thought that was produced, especially in the West, by the confrontation with the Soviet bloc. The West was actually highly improved in its own capacities by the confrontation with the Soviet bloc. Suffice to think about the civil rights movement in the United States in the 60s. You would not have had Brown versus Board of Education if there were no Cold War propaganda. I wrote a few years ago an article in the American Journal of Comparative Law on that. If you are interested in understanding the impact of Cold War narrative on comparative law, I refer you to that article. Okay, so he actually has never seen that, and he actually was in fact active in a time in which we were all very much convinced that the study of American law through the lenses of economics could be very useful in Europe, especially in order to make European law free from formalism and free from bureaucracy. And on that we work together very, very hard. I remember when I was preparing my, first of all, I came back to the United States to see Rudy's in 1993. Okay, so I graduated from Berkeley Law in 88. I went back in Italy. I got my professorship in Italy, and then he gave me a call and he said, would you like to come to the United States to work as a visiting professor? So I went back in 1993. The Berlin Wall was already fallen. Of course, we were at the very beginning of the construction of the narrative of single thought, and we were still working very hard in trying to make comparative law and law and economics join into a seamless whole who could work as a paradigm of analysis that was actually desirable as a tool to better understand legal ideas. He was enormously influential in making my book published by Michigan University Press. He wrote me all the letters of presentation of the book, and then the book was eventually accepted, but he never seen the book published because the book was published in 1997 and Rudy died in 1996. The story of the death of Rudy to me is actually particularly sad. Not because of the way in which Rudy and his lifetime romance Putti Schlesinger, who was actually with him for his whole life, decided together to leave the world at the highest of their intellectual capacity, even if at a quite old age. That I found a very noble thing to do, quite frankly. But to me, I remember that I received a phone call from Rudy on the 8th of November, asking me to go. That was 2 days before he died, asking me, Ugo, I need to talk to you. Can you come to San Francisco? I was in Berkeley and I was busy. And I just told to him, Rudy, I'm coming the day after tomorrow. I'm not going to come today. I cannot do it. I'm too busy, blah, blah, blah. I've seen him insisting a little bit, but I didn't realize what was going on. So he said, okay, goodbye. And I hung the phone. And then, that would have been the last chance to see him. I will never know what he would have told me. But to me, he was really a fatherly figure for a variety of reasons. I met him in 87, in a time of my life in which I was becoming a father myself. Clara was born in 88. I met him in 87. And when I returned to the United States, my father, who was just a few years junior to Rudy's, just passed away. So he filled up a void in my kind of still boyish life at the time. And whenever I think about the things, I'm still very touched. And I'm sorry if but this is, this is real life for me. In 1992, we decided, to me, the Common Core of European Private Law was really pretty much a way to try to show to Rudy that I was working hard in making his legacy alive. Okay, and his legacy alive was important to make it alive, because the work of the formation of contract, the work that was then published in 1967, the so-called Cornell seminars that took place at Cornell University between 1960 and 1966, I believe. So those Cornell seminars were really one of the most important founding moments of comparative law. Anybody who claims to be a comparativist must have read the formation of contract, a study on the Common Core of Legal System. The introduction to that book is a huge two-volume book. The introduction to that book, written by Rudy, I believe is the most important thing that any young comparativist can read if he wants to become really comparativist. Even if it is already 60 years old, is still way more advanced than most of the stuff that we read today. Okay, so my idea was, in a moment in which Europe was actually a very promising place. And how long I still have, Filippo? Can I talk a few more minutes?
Yeah,
Give me a sense to where.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So in Europe at the time, we are talking about 1992. Okay, so we had the Maastricht Treaty, and we had just before in '86, the Single Act, and that was a moment in which there was a lot of hope in Europe that could actually develop as a full-fledged space, not just of law, but also of politics, of culture. And there was some optimism about the European system. We had no clue of what kind of neoliberal nightmare Europe would become for certain countries like Greece, more recently, and right now like Italy. Okay, we had no clue about that. We had only this kind of very, so to say, hopeful and optimistic vision of Europe. And in Europe, comparative law was alive and well, especially in my own country, in Italy. As you guys know, some of you know for sure, there was a school of thought, the so-called legal structuralism of Rodolfo Sacco, that was building on Schlesinger's formation of contract and factual approach methodology, but introducing its own so to say, structural characteristic. Formation of contract was still a very functionalist approach. Okay, Rudy's work was very functionalist. It reflected, if you want, the optimism of functionalism. There is something that is desirable for everybody, and we can go to reach that kind of target altogether. Functionalism is an optimistic approach. Okay, structuralism is less so, I would say. It is more of an approach that already goes into the nitty-gritties of the actual structure of law and recognize the autopoietic nature of much of the legal discourse. We will then have, Turner working on that, and Duncan Kennedy and many others. But it seems to me that in the circles of comparative law, Sacco actually produced some sort of an improvement in the sense of enriched the paradigm through a capacity to analyze also deeply ingrained structures of thought that functionalism tended to erase a little bit. Okay, Again, I'm really talking now in a very sort of superficial way, but I published quite a bit on this kind of stuff. I have an article on comparing Sacco and Schlesinger, who was published back in 2001 in a collection by Annelies Riles called Rethinking the Masters of Comparative Law. So these are all things I've been putting some thoughts about for a long period of time, so I don't want to look naive. But this is really part of the origins of the common core in Europe. Okay, so we decided back in 1992 that would have been politically desirable to actually have a real knowledge of actual analogies and differences between legal systems in Europe. Okay, especially because Europe is rich of variations. Northern Europe, Southern Europe's many different legal traditions, common law, civil law, mixed systems, German law, Scandinavian countries. There is a huge wealth of experiences, and so some kind of good factual approach we thought would have been useful in drafting a map. We used the metaphor of the map with Mauro Bussani to describe what we were trying to do. Okay. So it was political desirable and scholarly useful to apply Rudi's methodology in a broader way, not only on a single issue like formation of contracts, but in large areas of the law, such as tort, property, and contract. We work on that with that was very fortunate in my life. I also felt fortunate from the kind of mentors I met. We work with some of the most important and impressive comparativists that are alive today. Not just Rodolfo, who was already old, he's still alive and 98 years old. I visited him a few days ago, but also people like Jim Gordley, people like Matthias Reimann, more of my generation, people like Franz Verro. These are some of the people that I believe have been injecting and creating some good mix of European legal sensitivity and American functionalism. Okay, and so we really studied the project in a quite sophisticated way. We met in Trento. There was Reinhard Zimmermann at the beginning, even. We met in Trento. There was Hein Kurtz at the beginning, even, who was like the big paladin of functionalism in Europe. So there was some serious brainstorming. And then we started working, and we involved more and more students, more and more people, and the common core went on. The optimistic faith in Europe lasted for a while. There certainly was a time in which there was a moment in which the opening up on the Eastern Bloc, when Hungary joined, when Poland joined, when Romania joined, that was a moment of enthusiasm that made us also have to rethink methodologically the project a little bit. We had quite a number of discussions about that. There is even a small book edited about that, if you look it up. So that was a time in which the Common Core was growing as a project, and I think that what was behind our mind there was an historical observation, at least in my mind. And I've been opening up the sessions of the Common Core for 27 years, okay? So every year I kind of take some time to think about what we are doing, because it's very important to do that. And I think that what we were really trying to do here was to find a successor as a legal model to the decline of US law that was becoming very visible, especially at the beginning of the neoliberal era. I think that Rudy Schlesinger was very fortunate in not seeing September 11, in not seeing the completely inordinate reaction of the US towards the attacks on the Twin Towers, of the, so to say, destruction of the rule of law within the United States in the beginning of the new millennium, and also the devastation of international law that the US have created over time in these last few years. This is really something that we had that Rudy didn't see and didn't witness. Okay, but this is where we actually thought that, and also from the point of view of legal scholarship, as you know, dominating models of law tend to decline when they become too parochial. That happened to French law, that was then substituted by German law. That happened to German law, that actually declined both for political reasons, but also because they had started to become a little bit too much self-centered. And this is also happening to US law in a very clear way, both because of the political incapacity of the rule of law to live up to its standards. Think about the complete politicization of the US Supreme Court in the United States. The US Supreme Court is now a completely partisan institution. It is not anymore that kind of high echelon of legal political thought that allows the elaboration of principles. It's just, 6 guys against 3 guys. Voting on partisan lines. And also you see the whole political correctness that has been developing in the last few years in American academia was just not out there at the time of Rudy's. So I think he was fortunate not to see that. And they've been sharing a lot of this conversation with Franz Werner, for example, in this last few years. For someone like us, that we started, our academic life in the United States, completely in love with United States law, seeing the decline so brutally, basically was a motivation to try to find in European law a substitute. A substitute that at least would have been capable to introduce and to go beyond the degree of parochialism and of domesticity that the US legal academia has developed in the last few years. American law is embarrassingly parochial. These guys don't speak languages, don't study the law abroad, don't understand differences, are completely embedded with dominant human rights cultures. They have a very limited capacity to perform as critical thinkers. I thought, and we thought, that in Europe we could provide that, and that European law eventually will morph in some sort of a model that could take the torch of legal knowledge and bring it to further generations. Okay? Also, that didn't occur. And this is really the last part of my talk. I'm just throwing here some ideas. This really didn't happen. European law was incapable of overcoming its bureaucracy. European law was incapable to rid itself of the capture of the global corporate power. European law is very much captured. European law is becoming today an agency of Western center propaganda and is not really a place of genuine attempt of understanding of the legal phenomenon. We are not capable to deploy the knowledge of European lawyers to understand what is going on today in the world. And I give you a couple of very quick examples and I'm done, okay? After September 11, 2001, we enter in a phase that is called surveillance capitalism, okay? It is a phase in which, rather than deploying the law as the main tool of social control, capitalism is deploying the algorithm and is deploying a variety of surveillance strategies based on big data. Okay? So this is an enormous change that has marginalized the lawyers online before. The life of the law in the legal platform is the life of the legal platform is a life that can provide for capitalist transformation without any need of law. The platform, the internet, is a take it or leave it kind of environment. You want something, you click yes, and you have it. You don't click, you don't have it. Take it or leave it. Take it or leave it is the logic of power. Take it or leave it is not the logic of the law. There is no space for the logic of the law online. Okay? And this 15 years, 20 years, in which the Western mind has been trained, and especially the one of younger people, to accept that the lawgiver is actually the platform to which you agree without any possibility to discuss what is going on, okay? That is the death of the law and the triumph of the fact. The death of the law and the triumph of the fact is the current condition of capitalism. And this is why I believe there is a huge need of critical thought through lawyers, because otherwise lawyers are going to be substituted very easily by the algorithm and by the smart devices, exactly as it is happening to many other professions around us. But if lawyers are substituted by the machine, then also the values of 2,000 years of discussions, of scholarships, of attempts to understand are going to be lost. Okay, so this is a point that is very important. And I believe this is something that in the Common Core we need now to push in the direction to try to understand seriously, not with, formalistic approaches in which we say, oh, we have, privacy law or the GDPR or stuff like that. No, seriously, structurally. What is the impact of introducing devices such as, for example, the Green Pass in certain European countries in order to make people access or not access certain places? This is take it or leave it. This is the Chinese model that is taking over. It is taking over very fast, much faster than we know, and is taking over exactly in the moment in which we develop rather a narrative of accusation of China, which is just what we are becoming, but we don't want to say that we are getting a transformation into some sort of a Western-centered despotism. Okay, this is very important that we should have this vision clear in front of us. And finally, the very final word: legal taxonomy, the core of comparative law. Working with Rudy Schlesinger at the time, I wrote an article called 3 Patterns of Law that obtained some sort of success, in which I was saying that there were 3 components that were competing for hegemony in every legal system of the world. The components being the political process, the legal process, the professionalized legal system, and the religious component or traditional component. And they will say, look, these kind of formats, let's call them that way, compete with each other, and legal system can be organized around the map of the world according to the degree in which the rule of professional law prevails on the rule of political law, the rule of political law prevails on the one of religious traditional law, and so on and so forth. So I was trying to offer a model for legal comparison capable of going beyond the traditional David Zweger-Kurtz and Schlesinger vision, common law, civil law, socialist law, that was, of course, now outdated. Now, today, that 3 patterns of law don't work anymore. Today, I believe there is a need to take into consideration that the algorithm, the technology, the smart contracts, the platform is creating a new pattern of law that in emergency is making us become closer and closer to the Chinese legal system. And so this 4th pattern of law, which is the algorithm, I submit, is the sort of model that we should endeavor in studying, because we have really to ask some hard-nosed questions on the compatibility between having our world ruled by algorithms and take it or leave it logic, and maintaining a culture of rights and a culture of equality. Today, at least in my own country, this is not happening. Thank you very much.
So, are there any questions from the audience, first of all? Anybody? This was a very stimulating and rich presentation. Anything online? Then, well, let me ask a question to Ugo, because you made a very interesting, by presenting the figure of Rudolf Schlesinger, which to all of my generation of comparative law scholars is, because I never met him, honestly, a myth. It's more an idea than a man, and you made him very much flesh and blood in your presentation, which I'm very grateful for. But what you showed is also a slice of the development of the discipline, which is comparative law, a slice in history. And comparative law has had a very interesting ride, I would suggest. I mean, it started with an enormous amount of enthusiasm and optimism for the future at the beginning of the 20th century, before the two world wars, in which we essentially developed the idea that you could quite easily create perhaps some form of universal, or at least pan-European legal system, and that would somehow also bring peace and prosperity to the world. Then we lost that first patina of optimism, and it was somehow substituted for perhaps a more, how can I put it, sort of scientific, or in its aspiration, scientific approach to analysis. And you have the idea that you expose very well, the optimism, but the optimism in terms of, well, let's get to work and through technical means, technical in terms of legal technicalities, create and start to really analyze the differences between legal systems. And that's where Rudolf Schlesinger plays a very strong part. And in that curve, historical curve, you have the European side of the Common Core, which you founded with Mauro Bussani. And in my mind, that was, at least at the beginning, embodied a sort of idea of comparative law as borrowing heavily its paradigm from source of natural sciences to some extent, because you had the idea of mapping, the idea of measuring differences was very strong in that first part. So my question to you is, well, now that a quarter of a century and a little more actually has passed with the Common Core of European private law, what do you think are the intellectual goals of this project? You ended with a sort of pessimistic note, but I would like you to bring your thoughts in the actual concrete aims of the Common Core of European private law. What are we about in this day and age?
Okay, thank you so much, Filippo. This is really, you see, this is really a long period of time in the life of a man. You know, we're talking about 27 years. It's basically the full life of a scholar, and the changes around us have been tremendous. And the very fact that we are still around, and that this is actually the only and the oldest project of European law that is still in action, show that we had a certain, I will use this term that I really don't like at all, but I will use it anyway, which is we showed that a certain kind of resilience, okay, in the way in which we have operated. First of all, I think for lawyers to know a little more about the law of another country is always an interesting thing to do, okay? After all, you know, we don't need to have a very sophisticated, so to say, political theory or social theory in order to engage in some good comparison. I find it more interesting and more fruitful, frankly, to actually compare than to talk about how to compare. Okay, there was a long time in which you know, there was all this discussion about the aims and the means of comparative law, if it's science, if it's scholarship, what it is, and if it's comparable, not comparable. I think that was quite boring, quite frankly, and I can see a lot of that re-emerging actually around us. But I always prefer people that set out there and compare rather than discuss how to do it. You can certainly do things much better than the way we do it, but you can. But if you don't do it, it's just that you're not comparing. So I think the Common Core had that kind of inherent force, okay, to be actually an effort in actually doing the work. And then the capacity to adapt, it seems to me, is the capacity to find out what are the new venues of interest that we should actually approach. We certainly have created a framework for the Common Core, like the idea of the meta-legal formats, as bad as the term is, but it's still giving the sense of law in context, and the understanding of law in context is still very important. So if we do comparative law, we do a critical exercise by definition, because lawyers tend to actually assume their own system as natural, and there is a lot of need of critical efforts in academia. Okay, so my suggestion now is let's find areas of law and areas that are really relevant in the developments we have in front of us. Let's really ask some real questions on what is actually going on in terms of, the way in which the very idea of a person that, meant the mask in old Roman law, and was meant to protect the interior part of each one of us, can actually still be a legal concept when we are constantly under a very sophisticated process of intellectual manipulation that make us believe kind of stuff that are most of the time completely fabricated. And we believe in the things sometimes in a very deep way, exactly because the very idea of personhood is now in crisis. Today, ideas such as equality are in crisis. We are actually looking at the emergency period. 2 years of emergency. Don't make an emergency anymore. This is something that maybe out there in Sweden things were handled actually I know for sure that were handled in a much better way. But the way things were handled in my own country, and the kind of very strong attempt to maintain emergency as a normal state of affairs in the world is something that takes lawyers out of the picture. Emergency is not compatible with the rule of law. Emergency is a state of exception. Emergency makes us become much more similar to what was Germany or the Soviet Union in the 40s than what were the United States at the time in which Rudy was teaching at Cornell. Okay? So, do we want to try as lawyers to understand what is really going on around us? Or are we just kind of assuming that things someday will come back as normal and business as usual will come back also in our own profession? This is a kind of question that I would like to approach. Emergency has a huge impact on contract law, on property law, on tort law, has a huge impact on liabilities, has a huge impact on responsibilities, has a huge impact on the notions of freedom and notions of obligations, okay? So these to me are the kind of areas in which if you are able to do common core work in those areas, we are doing something very, very important. And I want to finish with something. We've been working to make comparative law, and this was really part of the project of Rudy's and of the projects of functionalism. To make, you said it before very nicely, we work to try to make comparative law a non-political exercise. But I believe that today, for the first time, it is visible by everybody that there is nothing more political than comparative law. Countries were actually telling constant lies about other countries in order to promote their own strategy of emergency. Data from different jurisdictions were hidden. We are not, the comparative law became, so to say, popularly a political thing, you know, like saying things like, oh, you know, in Austria, they are doing worse than us. Or in France, look what they are doing in France, or in Germany, or in Sweden. You know, it's becoming something that is more of a cafe kind of conversation between people that are discussing in an inordinate way about politics than being a serious effort. And I think that the serious efforts are still very important, and they still claim that the Common Core is a serious effort.
Questions from the audience? We have one question from Lionel Smith. Do we have a microphone? Yes, please. Thank you very much.
And he comes up there, so I can see Lionel.
Yes, it's Lionel Smith.
Lionel. Yeah. I haven't seen Lionel for such a long time.
I think so. Yes.
Can you hear me, Ugo?
Yes, I can, but I cannot see you. Why don't you go in one of those stools?
Yes,
there.
yes. Come up, Lionel.
I can see you very nicely in front of Filippo. It'd be
Yes,
like
I
being
can
with
give
you.
you this one.
Thank you.
Then you can see. Okay, that was. It sounded like a good idea at the start.
Hey, Lionel.
Can I put it close to you? Is it too awkward?
I'll just go like this. Can you see me, Ugo?
Yes, I can hear, I can see. It's like being there. It's wonderful.
It's wonderful to see you, Ugo. It has been a while.
Yes.
And to see that that you've lost none of your passion that created the Common Core all those years ago. I found your presentation wonderful, to hear those personal reminiscences about Rudy Schlesinger, and just to hear your, especially the last part of your talk, your reflections on what's been going on lately. Very powerful. I wanted to ask you just about one thing, if I may. You were talking about how aspects of, you invoked smart contracts and algorithms and so on, and how this, in a sense, calls into question, I think your phrase was 2,000 years of legal values that have been evolved. And I was very encouraged to hear it expressed that way, because I'm a great believer in legal history, for example, in understanding the law. And I just wanted to ask you about one thread of your presentation where you talked about law and economics in particular in an earlier part of your own career, because you and I are almost contemporaries. In my own life, as I lived it, let's say in the 1990s, I was one of the people who felt law and economics as presenting a similar, let's say, blindness to that 2,000 years of legal history and of the legal values that had evolved during all that time. Particularly, I'm talking about private law. And so for me, and for a lot of people like me, what I would think of as the rise of, people sometimes say, rights-based understandings of private law. I was particularly influenced by people like Ernie Weinrib, but there are many others, of course. That was a response to law and economics. Those people self-consciously described themselves as formalists, not in a bad sense or in a pejorative sense, but in my understanding as a sense that promoted and defended an internal structure, an internal logic to private law that perhaps some law and economics scholars were rather blind to, seeing private law rather as just a tool to achieve one goal or another, such as wealth maximization. In other words, my own experience was to see some of the threats you're associating with smart contracts and algorithms as threats that were presented much earlier, before we even had email, through the rise of law and economics. So I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on that, but mainly thank you, and it's great to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lionel. What a great question. What a great question. And Look, I think it's. I think there was a preparation. I think you cannot, but this is something that I can see in retrospect. You know, first of all, I was never trained as an historian, and I always was a very sort of forward-looking kind of guy. Okay, in my general attitude. So the reason why I engaged in law and economics at the beginning in the United States when I went to Yale in 84, 85, was actually, I was persuaded that could have been a good tool to take away some of the incrustations of formalism in the bad sense and bureaucratism in the bad sense that I could see in my own country in Italy. Okay, so my motivation was clearly that. Later on, when I started, when I started already in the 90s to think it over a little better, and I was into the business of so-called comparative law and economics, I for a while thought that it was possible to change law and economics from within. Okay, I thought that the kind of critiques of people like you or like Wayne Rib, of those kind of critiques, were in some sense throwing the baby with the bathwater. And you actually, and it was actually important to introduce a degree of conversation between the ideas of incentives and the ideas of and the vision of the law. Then I lost faith, and since the half of the, already after I published comparative law and economics, that was already quite critical. I thought that was impossible to change law and economics from within because it was an industry. It was an industry richly financed by conservative think tanks. It was pretty much an ideological apparatus, okay? And so you're not going to change the ideological apparatus from inside. And so I shifted to other kind of things. I shifted to things like anthropology and so on and so forth, and to ecology and to other things like that. I believe that, however, now that you say this, I believe that there was a process of preparation of the substitution of the law with the algorithm. You see, the structure of the law is basically to actually take care of the details of a single human conflict, starting from the two Roman villagers living near each other, one making the cheese and the other getting the smell, is a very, so to say, context-specific and, so to say, case-on-case tailored kind of artifacts. And it deals with something that occurred in the past. The law is an ex post reaction to a historical fact. Okay? Law and economics was already shifting away from the analysis of law as a reaction to something that had occurred into law as an incentive to something that has not yet occurred. Okay? Which is, the typical idea of incentive, right? Law as a system of incentive rather than a system of penalties. I believe that the substitution of the law with the algorithm is the substitution of the mode of thought based on what actually occurred with a vision of the social organization based on what actually could happen. Okay? So it is basically the risk that I see is that this has nothing to do anymore on what the person has done in the stage of life, but has to do with how to make the person do the kind of things that power desires them to do. Okay? And think the kind of things that the power desires them to think. And this is really the shifting moment, it seems to me, that makes me now thinking about the relationship between the training of people for 20 years on the internet platform. We spend like 8-9 hours a day connected online, accustomed and trained to take it or leave it logic, okay? And the emergency. The nature of emergency is to deploy systems of social control that are not based on actually what happens, but on what could happen. If you see, the narrative now is very clearly like that. Emergency is maintained not because right now there is a specific risk of contamination, but because there might be a variation next fall and next autumn that is going to make again, very worrisome, the pandemic, and therefore those people who have been kicked out from job. In Canada, you did pretty bad too. And I'm sorry to notice that our friend Lametti was the Minister of Justice there when the use of technology has been deployed, opening up tremendous First Amendment issues. The moment in which you can get into the bank account of people and seize their money because they participated in some opposition to the government, exactly like in Italy, the moment in which you kick out from their work some people because they decided that they don't want to participate in the vaccination program, once 90% of the people are already vaccinated anyway. Okay, all of that are wounds to the very fundamental ideas that the law reacts to something that actually occurred on the stage of life, in which persons, legal or jural, participate in this sort of external stage. Now we are getting in. And surveillance capitalism is that. By the collection of the sensitive data of each one of us, there is such a higher level of knowledge of what we think and what we are likely to do, that using the law in order to control society, once you can use the algorithm and once you can use surveillance, is like, trying to go with the horses against the Nazi tanks during World War II. It's just a very, very weak artifact, unless we make it stronger. And the transformation of many lawyers into robots and the devastation of the critical capacity of many lawyers is very, very serious.
Thank you very much. So, any other questions? We have one or two, sorry. One question. You were pointing to her, okay, sorry. Yeah, please come forward to the microphone, please. And sorry, you will not be able to see her, but perhaps you can even take the microphone if you wish, come to the stage, but I'm not sure about it.
It would be lovely.
Yes. Can you just take the microphone, so please? It's the one. Sorry.
Illuminating to have Professor Ugo Mattei here. It's me, Mariella. I think it's very important when you take the part of the micromanagement of life from, when Foucault wrote, society must be defended, he already predicted that would be happening. But just about Professor Rudolf Schlesinger, when I went to Cornell and I was attending the research colloquium with Professor Lasser, he introduced us to all these great scholars from Italy, including Professor Mattei that wrote Plunder, and it was circulating in the US by the time, and Rodolfo Sacco. So it's the reason why in the School of Turin, now there are 2 students from Cornell who attended the LLM and felt engaged into dialoguing with this comparative approach. So it's just like I feel rewarded to have had this opportunity. It's just that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you want to comment on that lovely remark?
Well, it's very lovely. I mean, I think that people, and especially young people, that come close to our line of business are those we should always keep in mind when we engage in what we are doing. And I think that it's very important to feel that what we're doing is opening minds and opening conversations and allowing people to second guess and to question the global narrative, especially when we are in so much of a globalized society, yet so much determined by tremendous propaganda going on, and a clear attempt of construct the world as like the hooligans of two different teams of soccer. Okay, I do not believe that we can enter into one or the other narratives without criticizing, first of all, ourselves. Okay, I think this is the most important teaching of comparative law. If we compare it to, you know, for example, global law or to international human rights and things like that, because comparative law has a very strong self-mirroring and self-critique component, which I think is what is really missing today, even in the global political conversation. I was looking at the news in Cuba on the other day, and everything was, you know, pro-Putin. I was looking at the news in Italy, and everything is completely pro-Ukraine. Both of the narratives are extreme. Both of these narratives disallow and outlaw commentary. I've been, you know, trying to introduce issues, even of looking historically what is going on. You know, in a period of time that goes between at least 2014 to today, but history is long. And even if you try to address the issues historically, you are attacked as a disloyal and as an enemy. This is the disaster that occurred after September 11, 2001. Okay, is the confusion between critique and opposition with disloyalty. Okay, the critical person is considered disloyal. Academia cannot accept anything like that. This is exactly what happened during the vaccination saga in my country. If you were trying to introduce some questions and some hard-nosed questions about who is benefit from what, about the tremendous level of corruption that is going on around us, about the tremendous disregard of a variety of issues, including, you know, narratives of precaution, and even talking about the things is making you become an enemy. This logic of the enemy friend is the logic of emergency, and the logic of emergency is not the logic of the law. Is the logic of a clash, is the logic against which Rudy Schlesinger devoted all his life, and is the logic against which I will devote all my life.
So are there any questions from the chat, Mauro? No, yeah, nothing? Is there anything here? Okay. I think I don't see, because I have lights in my eyes, so you need to be very, very obvious if you are raising your hands. No, I think not. So thank you very much, Ugo. It has been a pleasure having you with us. It has been a very interesting presentation, and thank you for the questions that were really, really interesting. And I should also mention, which I didn't do in the beginning, that Mauro Bussani, who was also meant to be here, unfortunately couldn't for personal reasons. And therefore, we are finishing a little bit earlier than we thought, but that's not a big issue. We have a lunch at 12:30, so we'll have a little bit time to stretch our legs before going there. So thank you very much, Ugo. It has been, as always, a true pleasure.
Thank you, Filippo, and really thank you. I really appreciate your engagement with the Common Core, and I hope in the bright future of our project.
Bye. Have a nice... The morning we are, as I said, having a lunch at 12:30 at the faculty club. Before that, we can have a little bit of a leg stretcher. So thank you very much for staying with us.